to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at Melee by Walrus Audio. Okay, before we get into this, I need to disclose one thing, and it's that I am a NES main, so go ahead and keep that in your head as we go forward on this video. This is Melee by Walrus Audio, and this is, to me at least, a long-awaited return to form for the brand. And by form, I mean the inclusion of joysticks. One of my first ever Walrus Audio pedals, I think possibly my first ever Walrus Audio pedal, was the Janus, the fuzz tremolo dual joystick pedal that I think they still make. I'm not actually sure. I sold that like probably 5 or 6 years ago and have regretted it ever since. Are joysticks on guitar pedals the most practical thing? And the answer is probably not, but are they the most fun thing? And the answer to that is absolutely. I honestly loved playing the Janus live because being able to grab those joysticks or kick them with your feet to do really kind of like sloppy but fun, chaotic moments in music ended up being a really enjoyable piece of the performance for me. And now we're back today with another joystick equipped offering from Walrus that offers up just as much fun and honestly just as much chaos. This is, to put it overly simplistically, a shoegaze machine. This is going to be a 3-mode reverb and a distortion, switchable order, 3 modes of reverb, adjustable tone and decay lengths, mix on the reverb, amount of distortion, master volume, all that stuff. To call it shoegaze specific feels a little unfair because I think some of the voicings on the distortion on this thing actually end up being very versatile. You heard on that intro song, there's a lot of shoegaze influence there. It's definitely where I started and kind of where the first kind of morsels of inspiration start coming out for me for this pedal. But as you heard on the outro of that song, by switching the order back to a more conventional distortion into reverb, and by kind of dialing back some of the more chaotic aspects of this, we end up with a much more conventional rock and roll tone that just feels massive. And I think that's why Walrus isn't so much using the word shoegaze as they are saying wall of sound for this thing, because that's really more so what it is. Do you want something focused and tight and specific? You can get that. It'll still be a wall of sound. You can get massive, clean, articulate, kind of like forward-facing distortion guitar parts on this thing that sound amazing and still have that massive quality to them. Or you can go for those more conventionally shoegazy reverb into distortion sounds, and it will do that too. And it will also explode your amplifier in the process, which is kind of what you want in that situation, is it not? And speaking of classic shoegaze tones, you have 3 reverb modes in this thing, switchable by hitting both buttons at the same time. You have a modulated reverb that is incredibly lush. You have an octave down reverb, mostly pulled from the Walrus Audio Slow, and you have a reverse reverb in this thing. And it is a really good one, and I am somebody who is not conventionally a big fan of reverse reverb, so for this one to be great is a really nice touch. There's some interesting quirks about this pedal as well. As you can tell, the form factor for something with such a robust feature set is pretty minimal. It's very stylish, it's very clean, it's a great little cool retro-y setup and everything, but that's because there are some concessions being made here. Instead of traditional knobs for your tone and your decay, you have 3 position switches that basically will set for 3 different EQ curves for your distortion and 3 different decay lengths for your reverb, kind of a short, a medium, and an incredibly long. It's worth noting that for that reverse reverb, that is instead a feedback control than a traditional decay control, so that's worth noting. There may be some people who kind of get a little bit like bummed out by the lack of those controls and instead going with these switches. I find that it's kind of a nice change of pace. It's not going to be for everybody, and I could see situations in which a knob would be a lot more conventionally useful, but the EQ curves being used and being implemented on that tone control are pretty great. I'm a big fan of the sounds in it. I think the decay lengths are solid, and this is not kind of your go-to reverb. It can be used as that, and we will explore it as that, but it's not like it's supposed to be your kind of like all-purpose reverb anyways. It's part of a like kind of more intricate and in service of a very specific vision here. So regardless of your opinions on those switches, I think that they are implemented pretty well for being the kind of like less flexible option. That third switch is going to be your order switch between your distortion and your reverb. And then the joystick itself is going to be your amount of distortion and your reverb mix. So that's really, really intuitive and really, really helpful, because at the kind of like bottom left corner, you have your cleanest and your driest. And as you move across that spectrum, it gets grittier, wetter, more chaotic. You get more of that kind of crazy harmonic buildup, all of those things that you would expect with your kind of like shoegaze wall of sound effect. So having said all that, I think that where I land on this thing is broadly positive. A more intricate tone shaping control on this thing would have been kind of helpful. I find myself kind of wanting to put an EQ pedal afterwards to kind of help clean up some of the kind of like reverb buildup into that distortion. But ultimately, when the rubber meets the road, this thing is a lot of fun and it sounds really good. We're gonna start our sound samples by just looking at the distortion by itself and then just the reverb by itself. And one of my big takeaways early on in playing with this thing is that I just think that the distortion in here sounds phenomenal. I think even if this was just a distortion pedal built out, this would have been a really strong release. And so to have those really great reverb sounds, and it's worth noting, also a lot of great reverb sounds in here, even if you run this thing clean, which you can, both sides separately perform really well, even with that limited control set. And blending them together with that strong control set is phenomenal. It is a fun pedal. So if you are into this kind of thing, if you like that shoegaze thing, I highly recommend you check it out. If you just want something a little bit weird and kind of like quirky, if you want something that changes up how you approach your signal flow, your tone shaping and everything, get a pedal with a joystick. Maybe it's the Janus, maybe it's this, maybe it's something else, but I recommend you get a pedal with a joystick. It's worth investigating. Let's go to our sound samples. As always, let's go ahead and talk through our signal chain and the context we're working in before we jump into our sound samples. I am playing my Bunting Melody Queen T with a Wolf Tone Telly bridge pickup and a Mojo Tone gold foil in the neck. And we are playing into the Walrus Audio Mira compressor, the Benson Germanium Boost, the Origin Effects MEQ driver, the Bondi Effects Sick As Mark III, into the Chase Bliss Habit, the Caroline Guitar Company Megabyte, and into the Walrus Audio Melee. From there, we go into the Strymon Dig and the Vongon Ultrasheer. And then in stereo, we continue on out to our amplifiers, which are a stereo pair of Universal Audio Dream and Ruby. Guitar, bypassing everything directly into the amps, sounds like this. The Melee control scheme is a little unconventional, but ultimately pretty straightforward and easy to get your head around. You have a series of switches along the side, one knob, and then this XY axis joystick. The bottom switch over here is going to be your effect order, delay into reverb or reverb into delay. Then you have your decay for the amount of decay on your reverb, and that's a 3 position. You have a tone control that's also a 3 position. Leftmost is going to be mostly kind of flat and straightforward. Middle position is going to be darker, and then right position is going to be brighter. Volume is exactly what it sounds like. It's volume. I tend to like it right about 130 or so as kind of my startup sound. The x-axis on the joystick is going to be your distortion. The y-axis, the kind of horizontal, is going to be your mix on your reverb. So cleaner, dirtier, drier, wetter, and then anywhere in the middle. By kind of keeping this thing along the inside, keeping it, even though it feels like without access to hard corners, it feels like you're going to lose track of like a totally dry signal if that's what you want. But as long as the joystick is kind of touching this side as you move, you'll still get a kind of reverb-free experience. And same thing along the bottom. You can get a distortion-free experience along here. So we're going to use that system to basically explore the distortion first, the reverb second, and then we'll start kind of dragging into the middle and kind of seeing the real value, the real wall of sound, chaotic beauty that is Melee. So let's dig in. Starting everything off in the kind of most zeroed out position. We've got our tone in the leftmost position, like I said. So once you bring in that distortion, it's worth noting, if you've got it zeroed out at the bottom, noon is a volume drop, but it does a good job of keeping everything pretty straightforward and pretty like even with your dry tone. But like I said, I think distortion sounds better loud, so. Okay, let's give that tone control a listen. So this is going to be, like I said, our kind of flattest and most accurate. Middle position is going to low pass everything a little bit. We'll explore that a little bit more in our reverb into distortion area. I find that middle position, it can be really great for kind of drier rhythm guitar parts. You know, when you want something really chunky that kind of vanishes into the mix a little bit, provides some kind of like gravity to your mix, I find that it gets a little too muddy too quickly with the reverb kind of in play. However, this right position, this kind of like treble boosted position, I think is like the sauce. You can already hear it's going to be slightly noisier, but I find that it's pretty worth it. Yeah, that's the jam. I love a good distortion, and this thing, for being a kind of essentially 2-in-1 meant to kind of like glue together, the distortion in this thing just also sounds really good. Even like lower gain distortion settings in here. I love that. It's really great. Okay, let's jump over to the reverb. So we are going to go ahead Make sure that we are kind of like maintaining or slightly boosting with that volume control, because we are not going to touch the distortion for this part of the video. And there's a couple things to know about the reverb. You have your decay amount over here, you have your mix along that y-axis like we talked about, and then you have the ability to switch between 3 different modes of reverb, an ambient reverb, an octave down reverb, and a reverse verb with feedback. And by pressing both switches together, and then you see that light on the right side cycle through, and then there is a sustain control for being able to hold your reverb trail. As you can tell. So let's go ahead, drop down to like a 50% mix or so. You can go full wet. Let's walk through some of these decay lengths. So that's going to be your shortest decay length, at least in this modulated mode. Your medium. And your longest, which really drags, which is nice. Let's give that medium a listen with some actual playing. And that longest one. Okay, let's go back to that middle position and jump to mode 2, which is going to be that octave down, which is going to be very reminiscent of the octave down in the slow. And that reverse. So you'll notice that instead of a traditional decay right there, that's actually going to be kind of feedback, like repeatedly bringing back that note. So that decay is going to function more as a feedback control in this third mode, in this reverse mode. This kind of reverse right here is something that I think, not to get too far into tangents too early, but with like a stereo verb and a stereo delay behind it. So yeah, those are the modes. Let's jump back to that first one again. And let's go for something a little bit more conventional, you know, drive into reverb still. But let's now take this guy, go back to that flat tone. So we've explored going up this side, and we've explored going this way. Let's go the fun way. It's great to be able to like get really fine-tuned combinations of those settings. Especially like that octave down, being able to get really, really chaotic. So like I said, this is where we could jump into that darker tone. And start getting some really bizarre. Again, what I like is that brighter, more aggressive thing. Oh, and it's worth noting before we jump over to the real shoegazy wall of sound chaos. The really low gain stuff on this thing into a little bit of that reverb is really great. Like, the subtle moments on here are really solid. Everything wide open. And of course, the obligatory My Bloody Valentine, reverse, forever, into distortion. Especially with that reverse, there's some really great spaces in the more subtle side of things. Like, you can obviously go up here and just hit a chord and just let it like go crazy. But I think the beauty really is in a little bit of restraint. That's the other thing that I think is important in unlocking a pedal like this is your playing dynamics become essential. Like you can do what I've been doing for a lot of this so far, which is just kind of like wailing away on my guitar, but and that can be really useful for certain aspects of writing with a tool like this. But I find that when it comes to like the really great moments, the really high moments of nuance and intentionality with something like this, it comes in those really carefully chosen lighter and heavier playing dynamics, as well as the use of something like a trem arm, like a whammy bar kind of thing. You can do things where if you go to just that reverb or that distortion by itself, you can do these cool little those little bends and stuff that will kind of like add some texture. And that's all well and good. And even distortion into reverb, you can create something really cool with that. But it's that drag, it's dragging that delay or that reverb through the distortion that really gives you that grit, that that's where I really fall in love with this thing, in my opinion. A little bit of delay afterwards for some width. Especially down in those lower. And it's also worth noting that there's a lot of value in the in adding a delay ahead of things. So like you've got your tone. And what I love about this is also where your tremolo picking really takes off into the stratosphere. So you can take it from, and And you can get pretty dialed in on that just with the current, like just with the Melee by itself. But you can go more restrained, keep all that texture, throw something like the Megabyte in front of it, which, by the way, quick shout out to Caroline for making an absolutely insanely good delay pedal. And then you've got this.